Welcome to another episode of Talking College Football with J.J. Kitchen. Of course, I'm your host, J.J. Kitchen. Guys, before we get into it today, the big topic that's been well talked about between the national media and national markets, obviously the SEC and the Big Ten creating an advisory board to talk about the future of college athletics, but more importantly, football when it comes to terms of what does the Power Four look like? What does the college football playoff look like? And will those two leagues accept other leagues to go with them when they leave the NCAA, which I truly do predict. But before we get into the video today, guys, of course, the show is sponsored by Colonial Beer, located at 4986 Library Road in Bethel Park, PA 15102. Again, guys, go ahead. They got plenty of great selection there. The fake slide Pilsner for all you Pitt fans who watch the show, but more importantly, to the ACC fans that will be coming to Pittsburgh. Plenty of great places to go, but more importantly, Colonial Beer, which is a great place and more importantly supports the student athletes of the ACC, but more importantly of the University of Pittsburgh. Guys, today got a really good topic. Again, the SEC and the Big Ten talking about an advisory board and officially creating it. And I thought there was a really good article from Heather Dinich from ESPN. I'm going to go into a little bit of that, but also, too, give you my thoughts from people that I've talked to, which I currently think is going to truly happen. I truly do believe the Big Ten and the SEC will eventually leave the NCAA for football only. But before we get into that, guys, the biggest thing when we look at it here, share my screen here with you guys. Again, a great article. I just want to show you guys exactly how it works. But more importantly, this article by Heather, I just thought was really, really good. Okay. Here, as you can see, the Big Ten and the SEC form advisory group as conferences bond tightens. As you can imagine, obviously, as they look at it almost like the Power Two because of the revenue streams of what we've seen, especially, too, when you look at the Big Ten and the SEC. The SEC starts their new contract with ESPN, CBS, now going over with the Big Ten. Those two leagues roughly, you look at the Big Ten, probably $70 million per team. The SEC more than likely getting to $70 million this year. But the Big Ten can eventually, with the teams they have in there right now and potentially a new bargaining in 2030, eventually get to $90 or even $100 million per team. As you can imagine, that stretches out, that really distance themselves between the ACC and the Big 12, two conferences that are looking to find a way to fill the gap. Obviously, the ACC is right now in a battle with Florida State. The ACC in general, if it gets to 2030, 2031, 2032, is when they start seeing $70 million in annual revenue, media revenue to each one of these schools. But is it going to make it to that point? But as we get into it here today, the Big Ten and the SEC have formed a joint advisory group of university presidents, chancellors, and athletic directors to address the significant challenges facing college athletics and how to improve the student-athlete experience. And the conferences announced Friday. I still kind of find it funny how they call it student-athletes, with players obviously getting paid less of the student-athlete. It's more of almost semi-pro or professional league at this point. The move is significant because it reflects a growing relationship between the two largest and wealthiest conferences and their respective commissioners as the balance of power continues to tilt in the favor in the evolving collegiate landscape. Sources have told ESPN that the Big Ten commissioner, Tony Petitti, and SEC commissioner Greg Sankey have been working closely together more than their predecessors had at a time when conference expansion has further separated the leagues from the other FBS conferences. The SEC will officially welcome Oklahoma and Texas this summer, while the Big Ten will add Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA from the Pac-12 that is on the verge of extinction. The advisory group was formed in reaction to recent court decisions pending litigation, a patchwork of state laws, and complex governance proposals, according to the Big Ten news release. The Big Ten and the SEC have substantial investment in the NCAA, and there is no question that the voices of our two conferences are integral to governance and other reform efforts, Petitti said in a statement. We recognize the similarity in our circumstances as well as the urgency to address the common challenges we face. The Big Ten SEC advisory group will act as a consultant to the leagues, but won't have authority to implement changes. Its composition and timetable and the specific issues will tackle and still unclear. What it has done, though, is further bind the two behemoths together. There are similar cultural and social impacts on our student athletes, our institutions, and our communities because of the new collegiate athletics environment, Sankey said in a statement. We do not have a predetermined answer to the myriad of questions facing us. We do not expect to agree on everything, but enhancing interaction between our conferences will help to focus our efforts on common sense solutions. Guys, when I look at this from a perspective of what does this truly mean when you look at these two types, when this direction that they're going in? For me, this is a clear sign. This is a step one of the Big Ten, the SEC, officially deciding to work together to officially leave the NCAA. That's my true opinion from anybody I've talked to, from legal, anything, especially to ESPN, anybody within the ACC, the Big Ten, and the SEC, even a couple of people I've talked to in the Big 12. It's kind of a good sign that these two conferences are clearly tired of the NCAA, which I agree. The NCAA has been horrible in terms of governance, in terms of laws of what they're able to pass. I truly believe, and I've talked about it before, these two things are really just coincide with each other, okay? To the point where the NCAA, they'll penalize a certain team, but not penalize this team for the same type of infractions. I think the infractions, when you look at overall recruiting, I think they become stretched. In terms of players who are actually eligible, that's another whole aspect. One player A and one player B might have the same circumstances, but only one becomes truly eligible. And we've seen it over time from year after year after year. But also, too, now with the common sense of, NIL, what that potentially looks like for these two conferences and for the ACC and the Big 12, I think it comes down to really two things when I look at it. The first option, the SEC and the Big Ten leave the NCAA on their own, creating what we like to call a league of their own. And almost like an AFC and an NFC, almost like the National Football League, and really starting to take that round shape to where they're going to take their billions of dollars and create their own league in terms of viewership, what they're able to do, pay players. Obviously, I think at that point, potentially making them employees to the university, making it easier to pay for them. The NIL collectives will probably phase out and go away, and then you just donate all the money to the school, which I think honestly would probably be easier. I think if you take the collectives out of it and just let the university take care of this, it really enhances it. But the question is, what does really happen with the other sports at the universities? Title IX gets involved. Are there going to be potential lawsuits? Do these schools still have the non-revenue sports? Is there a way to still implement, for instance, the football revenue from these schools to bring that into the schools and then also to function and to facilitate and pay the non-revenue sports? I think there's a way to work that out. And I think that these two conferences officially kind of figured it out to say, you know what? Let's kind of get together. Let's talk. But more importantly, let's bring ESPN and Fox together with CBS, NBC, and to really focus on what we need to do. Because here's the biggest thing. College football playoff is only set now for 2 years. It was currently set at a 6-6, 6 conference champions and 6 at large. But now with the Pac-12 that fell apart, looking to go extinct, and I think it's what's going to happen, the Big Ten officially talked about it today, and it was really a good comment today by Tony Petitti, who's the commissioner of the Big Ten, talked about how it needs to change from a 6-6 to a 5-7. The Power Four, and then one group of 5 conference champion, and then 7 at large bids. But he also talked about the two conferences in terms of what do they need to do, but more importantly, the other two conferences, the ACC and the Big 12, in terms of big games down the road in the second half of the season. We've seen numerous games between the SEC sometimes where they're facing Sam Houston State, they're facing Georgia State, some game that really doesn't matter. They really want to show, but more importantly, Petitti from the Big Ten wants to show, hey, we're adding these teams into our conference. We want to have these games that really matter, even if there is 1 loss or 2 losses. They might have 1 or 2 losses, but he wants more Big Ten teams to get in. Personally, me, I think Greg Sankey is one of the best, obviously the commissioner of the SEC. He's not going to let the Big Ten allow to try to get their way in to get more teams in. The SEC is going to try to work their way in to get more teams in. So they're going to have that conversation. But I think that, right now, this was potentially really the first option is really the SEC and the Big Ten leave the NCAA on their own, create their own league, and really an AFC and an NFC. Now, here is the second option. They talked about the collective advisory group for the NCAA, but more importantly, for the Power Four. The other move that could potentially happen is the Power Four go with the SEC and the Big Ten. So then you have the Power Four, the teams that are truly involved with wanting to pay players NIL and create really a 68-team league. And Chip Kelly kind of talked about that, obviously, before he left UCLA to take the offensive coordinator job at Ohio State, which is kind of all over the place at this point. You have a sitting head coach leave UCLA, which is a great job. Now going to be a Big Ten school. The amount of money they're going to get, obviously their athletic department is quite a bit, over $100 million in debt. That's a major question mark. But where does that lead to going to the Big Ten? How do they continue to survive in terms of what their schedule looks like, and how do they compete in the Big Ten moving forward? But obviously Chip Kelly goes to Ohio State. Obviously, you had Jeff Hafley from Boston College leave a head coaching position to take a defensive coordinator job in the NFL. You're going to start seeing more of that as well. Coaches go from the college ranks to the NFL. Okay. And I think what you're also going to see here is collectively the Power Four potentially go together to where they create a pod almost of 68 teams. Again, what Chip Kelly talked about. And then you really have the out of conference to where, let's say, for instance, like the divisions in the NFL. Maybe you, in this case, obviously there's only 4 or 5 teams in a division for the NFL. In this case, you might only have in a 12-game schedule, you may have 7 conference games or 8 conference games, and then 4 non-con games, but around the the other 3 conferences to create those matchups to where you have, the SEC versus the Big Ten. So if you had like Ohio State versus Texas A&M, if you had, or for instance, if you had Oklahoma versus USC, the Battle of Lincoln Riley, the 2 schools there, that would be a hell of a matchup. I think, obviously if you had Michigan, you had the ACC, Michigan versus Clemson, or Michigan versus Florida State. If you had those type of matchups, North Carolina, potential matchups between the Big Ten, obviously great matchups that would be there. Obviously if you had Penn State versus anybody in the SEC, let's say, for instance, Alabama, Penn State versus Alabama, big Goliaths facing each other, it would be a really good matchup. And I think that those games overall, each game would matter. But if you had 2 or 3 losses, you still get the playoff. And I think that's wonder like how that will change. If it's 4 conferences together, what does that look like in terms of, okay, the Power Four? Is it still, hey, we'll take 12 teams, do a 12-team playoff still between the Power Four, and then you do 4 conference champions and then 8 at large. So that would be very interesting in itself as well. So these are really, in my opinion, the 2 options for anything that's out there. I think option 1 may be potentially the move that happens. The Power 2 moves out on its own. But collectively, there's been a lot of attraction to this as well. The Power 4, to where you keep the viewership up because you have so many schools in there. The schools that want to pay players, be involved in NIL, and you create those pods around the country to where it's like National Football League where you're going around the country. But then you have those enticing matchups between all of the different conferences, between the 4 conferences, the non-con games, and then you have in-conference foes, which would be extremely enticing. So those are my thoughts. Guys, let me know what you think. Obviously, subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. We continue to bring great content, but the show is nothing without you. Leave a comment down below. What do you think? Out of the 2 options or potentially other options, what do you think the SEC and the Big Ten are going to do? Are they going to go off the NCAA by themselves? Are they going to take the Power 4, or do they stay with the NCAA? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Again, subscribe to the channel. We'll be having a giveaway once we get to 1,000. Again, guys, can't thank you enough. More videos coming out here, especially with conference realignment, the ACC, what happens with the ACC and Florida State. Florida State now being able to buy back the media rights, potentially with a negotiation. That's going to be a whole nother video that comes out. If you want to see those, again, drop those down below with my thoughts and more guests coming on as we talk about those. Again, subscribe to the channel. Again, guys, it has been a pleasure as always. Again, be safe out there. But guess what? As always and forever, hail to Pitt. But let's hail to college football as we continue to go. I'll see you guys next time.